So, hello and welcome to another episode of Rustacean Station. I'm your host, Alan Weima. Today we have Albert Larsan. Did I say that right?
Yeah, that's about right.
So, he is a contributor to the tool that builds rustc, but not rustc itself. Is that right?
Yeah, it's right. This tool is named Bootstrap, and it is a very important part of the infrastructure to make rustc be able to build these new versions. Like a bit like Larsan that came a few episodes ago also does that.
How did you get into this work? I mean, because that's a pretty particular piece of work, right?
I mean, my first PR, the rustc repo, it was about this tool. Like it was merged in November 2022. So it was my first PR, and it was about, I had a problem with running rustc on my computer and I wanted to solve it. So I made a PR to solve it. Then at the end, I didn't have the problem anymore. I changed some things that made the problem for me disappear, but the PR still passed. And then after, I made a few other PRs, some follow-up and other general. I mean, for the usual starter PRs, docs PRs, typos, those kind of things. That's what I made. And then after, the Bootstrap team was created by Joshua and Mark Simulacrum mainly. And they invited me and a few others. Now we are 5 on the team to take care of this tool that is crucial for Rust.
Well, can we talk a little bit more about the tool itself and why it's so important to Rust?
So this tool is named Bootstrap because Rust is built, the language of Rust is Rust. So like you need a previous version of Rust to build the new version. And so it is this tool that tells, like Rust is also compiled with Cargo, like many other projects. So it is this tool that says to Cargo, use this compiler to compile those crates and use this std because we have to separate. We first compile std with previous beta or stable if we are on a stable release, but if we are on a nightly or a beta, I think we build with the previous beta release of Rust. So this tool works to make sure that the right versions are created. So there are 2 stages, 3 really, but it's 0 indexed, like most of the things in programming. So start with the beta compiler, and from that we build standard library. Then we build the compiler with that standard library. And then that's where most of the tests run because it is already the new compiler. But the standard library was still built with the old compiler. And so it may have new features. For example, the offset off macro was added as compiler intrinsic, like it is a magic function, magic macro. And so the standard library needed to add, since it was already compiled with the older compiler, it was not able to use it. So there is also a system that allows the standard library to switch between, if it's in an old compiler, it uses another implementation or the macro simply doesn't exist. Or if it's a new compiler, the one we just built with the latest code, we can use the intrinsic, the magic in the compiler. So it is very important to get this right. And some may build LLVM because Rust is based on LLVM. So this tool also cares to build LLVM in the right ways with the right session, for example, or the right targets to build the Rust correctly.
It sounds like a very delicate and difficult process to manage. I mean, there must have been some hiccups here and there, right?
Yeah, there are many. There have been many, and there will be many, because currently we can't even run Clippy on the rustc repo. So Clippy, when it's used normally, it assumes that the compiler it has been built with and the compiler it runs with is the same. But this just isn't simply the case with stage 1 compiler because it has been built by the beta compiler but runs alongside because Clippy uses most of the rustc magic, I would say. For me, it's magic. So it runs alongside the nightly compiler, for example. Most of the time, it runs alongside the nightly compiler. And so it breaks. Like, for example, it's mostly about the standard library. I won't get into the details, but for the build scripts, the standard library is absent in the new compiler, but is present in the old. So we must say to Clippy for the build scripts, use the old compiler and not the new one.
Sounds super complicated. I mean, what is kind of like the biggest challenge that you need to be aware of when you're working on this bootstrapping process?
One of the biggest challenges, I would say, is that the tool itself is not tested. Like, pretty much there is no tests. This is a big challenge because like we don't know what are the things that we are doing. Like if we change something, will Rust still build correctly or wrongly, or will it build at all? And we prefer the first or the last because Rusty built wrongly is not correct, but we prefer it to not build at all than it building but not correctly, not like it should be. So it is a big challenge that we do not have tests, and it is something we are trying to add more tests. And also another big challenge is that LSP support, like for the IDEs, is quite bad because Rusty is quite special. And if in Bootstrap there is something that crashes, and so suddenly the IDE thinks there is a big problem with like cargo and it doesn't want to run. And so most LSP support dies down, like there is no auto-completion, the errors are not in line. Another thing to be worried to think about. It is really fun to work like this. I mean, there are challenges.
Now, when you're saying LSP, you're talking language server protocol, right?
Yeah, the thing that makes the auto-completion and inline works into VS Code or NeoVim or Celia or the IDE or text editor you use. Especially in Bootstrap, the LSP bugs,
Yeah.
but in the rest of the compiler, it works great because Bootstrap works most of the time.
Now, what editor do you use? I'm kind of curious.
So I used for a long time VS Code, and I recently made the switch to NeoVim. I have not yet used it on the Rust repo, but I started using NeoVim because of some YouTube recommendations. And I wanted to try it out for another project I do semi for the Rust group. It is more about cargo and the different crate files. It is another problem at all.
Okay. It sounds so complicated and so difficult to work with. And you said that you cannot run Clippy. The tests are really difficult to run and write, right?
It's not like tests are difficult to run or write. It's just that there isn't any. So it is that is hard, and it is something we are trying to add more tests. We are exploring different ways to add tests. And yeah, we can't run Clippy, but that is in the whole repo. I mean, running Clippy for Bootstrap would be easy because Bootstrap is almost always built with the beta compiler. And this has not the problem of we use a rustc that is not the same version that Clippy was built with because there is not this problem with the beta Clippy. It's the same beta that everyone can download. So there is not this problem. So for Bootstrap itself, it would not be a problem to run Clippy. And we can run the beta Clippy currently, I think, in my latest PR, if I have not broke it. We can run beta Clippy on the full rustc, the standard library. We can run it, but it is about the latest version of Clippy that is a bit harder.
Why is it that it's so hard to use the latest version? Is it because it requires some new features in the upcoming or latest version of Rust?
No, it's like Clippy is a bit bizarre in the way that they replace a bit of cargo and a bit of Rusty. It is in both worlds. So when you run cargo Clippy, it is not built-in cargo command. It rather runs the common cargo Clippy that then calls into cargo check with special environment variables that make it use the Clippy driver. So it is a bit harder because we must say to Clippy, like we do not have a full compiler. Stage one, there is not yet the standard library since we are trying to use Clippy on this version of the compiler. So there is not yet a standard library. And for proc macros or build scripts that poses a problem because they use the standard library. And that is what is harder to make work.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So then you're not even using standard, right? You need to use core, right? Is it called core?
I mean, rustc uses standard, and Clippy also. But the problem is in the build scripts. So it is a bit of code that runs before your code is compiled. And this, for now, Cargo handles it correctly. Use the old version of the compiler that is full, that has the standard library installed and correctly working. And it uses it to build the build scripts, and it works. However, Clippy, for now, I'm trying to make it work, but Clippy for now doesn't have this property. So like it can't decide whether it can use the correct compiler version with the standard library. It uses a version that does not have the standard library, and that is the problem. What is missing is the fact that Clippy should choose the version that has the standard library. I'm not sure if I'm clear, but...
Okay, I see. I believe I understand. Okay, I mean, so when you're working with bootstrapping rustc, sounds like a very delicate process where things can break. How do you kind of check that things are still working okay? Do you have a CI that actually tries to build Rust so that way you know it's working okay? Or
we have the same CI as rustc or standard library contributors. We run on the same repo, so we have the same CI. And if this CI breaks, so we must fix it. It is the same process, just it breaks at another point. Instead of breaking when building rustc, it breaks when building Bootstrap. So it fails earlier, but sometimes harder to debug because we still are using Python to start the bootstrapping process.
Why Python? It seems kind of weird, I think.
I don't know the exact reason, but what I know is that a long time ago, the Bootstrap system was written in Makefiles. So it was switched an hybrid of Python and Rust because at the time, they assumed that not everybody had a working Rust compiler and cargo and etc. So they use Python because I think they assumed that everybody has Python 2. We are still, I think, backwards compatible to Python 2.7. I think.
Okay, well, that's the old version, yeah.
So it works that way. So Python is mainly used to download the beta rustc cargo and standard library for the host, and then build Bootstrap and launch Bootstrap. That's what it's used, and after the Rust part of Bootstrap kicks in and builds what is left of rustc. All of rustc and the standard library and all the tools that are around, like Cargo and Clippy and rustfmt and rustdoc, and there are even more, I think.
I'm almost wondering, like, why not just use like a bash script or shell script of some kind? Sounds like it could do the same thing.
It could do the same thing, but one thing that is great is that Python has toml support, and we have the config file in toml, and we do not want to pass toml in bash. And bash isn't very portable to Windows.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that. Yeah, I had no idea that. I totally forgot about Tom. I had no idea that toml support was actually in Python. It's actually part of the standard library, or is it an extra something, it's a dependency you have to add in?
We don't use or anything like that. It is in the standard Python library, I think.
Interesting. Okay, I never knew that.
Or it's not necessarily in the standard, but it is installed in all the cases that we are testing on CI. I think we are even testing. So currently we have 3 different entry points, all named X, but there is x.py, the Python file, and we have just X. This is a shell script that goes and finds the right Python to run x.py. That runs all this machinery. So like we choose the latest version available on Python 3. And we have an x.ps one that is for the PowerShell users. And those have the same thing, but it works also on Windows. So like we test in one of the jobs in Linux and macOS and Windows, we use both x.py and x.ps1, except X on Windows because it doesn't work. But we use all 3, we test all 3 of these entry points to make sure that they still work correctly. It is also a part of the Rust CI, so every PI is tested also for that every time.
Mm-hmm. And then you run them against all the major distributions, right? I'm guessing probably a couple of distributions of Linux, for sure, Mac OS, right?
So currently we use the GitHub Actions mostly. So we have the
Mm-hmm.
standard Linux, but for Linux we use Docker very much. So like I think there are very old versions of CentOS that are used, but I'm not the most qualified to talk about CI. But I think I have seen multiple times old version like 6 or 7 CentOS 6 or CentOS 7 used.
Mm-hmm.
And so we make sure that they are used to build the main rustc to make sure we are still compatible with older kernel and glibc, etc. Like macOS, I think we are now currently on the macOS 12 currently because it's the version that is supported by GitHub Actions. And like the people that are in the infra team are thinking about switching to 13 because it is much faster to build. Currently, building on macOS
Mm-hmm.
is one of the slowest things on which we build. And Windows, so we take what can. It says that we support down to Windows 7, but we don't really test that. So it is also discussed whether to unsupport Windows 7 and Windows 8 at the same time.
Mm. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Seems it makes you a little bit worried, right? If you say that you support Windows 7, but you're not actually testing against that, right?
I think when I say we, in this case, it is the whole Rust team as a whole rely on testing of individuals and reports of individuals that says, hey, this is broken on my version, on my unsupported version of Windows, but that is still supported by your language. And they say that, and the compiler folks or the standard library folks says, okay, we'll fix that. And most of the time they fix it. Like Windows XP is still in quotes supported. Like we can build code that will run on Windows XP with the current rustc, but it is not guaranteed at all. And I think standard library doesn't work, but we can still like code that is no STD that uses only core. I think should work still on Windows XP, but it is really hard. It is not made for that. Like we are testing on the, I think 2016 or 2022 version of Server. So it's like Windows 10 basically. Like it is what GitHub provides.
Okay.
We can't really work with
Yeah.
anything else because except for the Arch 64 versions, so the ARM for Linux, they have their own, so they are called self-hosted version of those to run tests on Linux. That's why support for ARM processors on Linux is higher than for macOS because they don't have macOS M1 or M2 Max to test on currently.
That's a bit surprising because there's quite a few CI companies that do have M1, M2 Max for running on. That's surprising, actually.
Yeah, but GitHub doesn't have them currently. It is planned. Like there is a discussion about that. The infra team has regular
Mm-hmm.
calls with the GitHub team. And so they ask it and they say it will come later. So we are still waiting.
Any idea when later?
No, they won't say it, or at least maybe the team know, but they won't disclose it to avoid putting GitHub in the rush if they are not ready.
Okay. What kinds of features has the bootstrapping team for rustc been working on recently?
So we have been working on the download rustc feature. So like instead of downloading the first version of rustc, if you make a library change, you don't need to rebuild rustc every time because the first stage of rustc, it is built with the beta compiler. And so it won't change already. It won't change if you make a change to the standard library. So what happens is that for stage one build, we download the rustc from the CI, and we get this rustc from CI to speed up. Basically, we avoid having to build rustc every time. We can keep it. And same way around, if you only make changes to rustc, we can also download just the standard library and use it instead of having to build it again each time. It is a bit of a convenience and
Mm.
yeah, it is something that should be better. Also, we are working on removing Python, not removing, but making it not the only way to run Bootstrap, like having having a part, having the start that is already in Rust. If you have the rustc compiler installed on your system, then you won't need Python. That would be one other goal. Or just running Clippy on the repo. I managed to do it once before it broke again, or the architecture wasn't right. I don't remember. But I managed to run Clippy, and there was several thousands of warnings across the whole rustc repo. So this includes rustc, the standard library, and many other things.
So is there also plans to run Clippy more and kind of fix all those issues, or is it just the way it is?
Yeah, I think that currently there is no plan because there is no Clippy, but after that it will be on the compiler team and the standard library team to decide if we want to enforce Clippy or not. But currently the goal is just to get Clippy working and make sure that it stays working and test at least that it runs in the CI. Even if we don't enforce it, test at least that it runs.
What's the point to enforce that it runs rather than actually also enforce that you follow Clippy? If you know what I'm saying, like it seems like a little bit of waste of time, no?
So the point is to avoid having Clippy breaking, like we can't run it anymore. The point is just that it is not after it will be on the compiler team and the library team to decide whether they want to enforce it or not. But currently it is on the Bootstrap team to get Clippy working.
So if deciding not to enforce it, then what will be the plan? Would the plan be continuing to make sure Clippy keeps running or eventually just stop because there's nobody going to be using it?
I think the plan would be to keep Clippy, making sure that it still works because it is still a very useful aid in development with Rust. Like I have my editors to run Clippy instead of just check because there's so much things to think about in Rust that are just a machine is way better than us to think about some things. And so I prefer asking my computer, hey, is this code good or bad? And it can at least say, here, I detect that you have a bad idiom or something like that.
So then you would just run Clippy on just the code that you're working on.
You could just run Clippy on the code that you're working on, but also Cargo is really good at caching. So like if you modify, so the Rust compiler is divided into many, many crates, some that are like tiny and others that are bigger. And all those many crates, Cargo is really good at just recompiling the crates that need it. It's sure that if you modify a crate that is fundamental, one of the base crates, it will recompile everything. But if you use one that is like a leaf crate, it will only recompile this, and that's all. And so Clippy would be the same because it uses Cargo. Under the hood, Cargo Clippy is using Cargo.
Okay. Now, like, besides keeping Clippy running and kind of all this stuff, what else is coming up on for features for bootstrapping rustc?
What else is coming out? I think that's about all for bootstrapping rustc because it is a process. Another thing is the redesign of the stage design. Instead of using stage 0, 1, 2, 3 in some rare cases, we want to change this for meaningful names, like having, and so the name would be the sysroot. It's like, so the sysroot for the development, currently the stage 1. So it is the thing that you run the tests on your computer and you check if it's still built, etc. That would be the dev. After you have I don't know exactly the name, but I think it is something like release or something like that. Not the fully optimized because there are many steps for example, on Linux, there are many steps after stage 2 that are used to make even the compiler even more performant. But I mean, it would be the release that would be the compiler that is shipped in most cases. And after that would be another stage that would be like verification that the code is still correct. Like it doesn't change itself if we recompile Rust with the same version. I don't understand this well. It is also used in other bootstrapping compiler like GCC. is also written in C or C++, and they have to use the same kind of system. And they have also a time where the shipping compiler builds itself to make sure that it doesn't change widely.
Okay.
There is an MCP for this, so it is an MCP is process in the compiler team, allows the team to discuss about that allows the compiler team and maybe other teams to discuss about major changes to the compiler. There is a similar process that is named differently for the libs compiler and for the libs team and the lang team. So on the MCP, and it is so the dev sysroot. So the name changes from stage to sysroot also. So there is the dev, then the dis, and then the reproducible sysroot that would be used instead of stage 0, 1, 2, 3. And so the reproducible would be very rarely used. And like even on Linux, for example, just running tac dash release on Cargo doesn't make it, isn't the whole story, because there is a few must-haves that have names like LTO, PGO, Bolt, etc. So those are big names for other kinds of optimization that the compiler itself can do, even with up level 3 and Cogent Units 1 and LTO. Like there is LTO, but another version of LTO that is even more powerful than the one that is already included in the compiler in rustc. And so those are all optimization that, for example, PGO is the acronym for Profile Guided Optimization. So like we run rustc on many programs, on many test programs, and we record where the program goes. For example, if function is called many times, inline it in the other function instead of separating it out to save on cycles and make the compiler even quicker. This is an example, and others like Bolt that do optimization from what I understand. I'm not working in this area, but from what I understand, it is doing optimization on the raw assembly itself, so making the compiler also faster.
Oh, it sounds like quite a bit of really good work coming in. Yeah, I think I understand mostly about how this stuff works. I mean, no other kind of questions are popping into my mind. Is there something else that you'd like people to know about the bootstrapping process for rustc?
No, it is just don't mess too much with it without talking about it with the Bootstrap team. But it is the same thing you would do with the compiler or the library. Don't mess too much with it without talking about whether people know that stuff. I'm not sure I know much, but whether people know that stuff or have deciding power not to do useless work. Like we have meeting one Monday over two, like one Monday we have and one we do not have. On the Zulip, everyone can join and speak and propose things. Open, we are still looking for people that enjoying working with that, can't to don't want to run to do the compiler itself. But for the library, I mean, I know that at the time I had a very not powerful PC. So the Bootstrap, as it was the first thing that ran, it was easier for me to work on it than, for example, the optimization of the compiler or things like that. Another reason why I chose Bootstrap is that I had PC that was given to me by my schools and it is not very powerful. So I used it as much as I use it as much as I can, even still today. And so it is something that does not require 32 cores and 64 gigabytes of RAM, unless otherwise some of the things in the rustc repo might need not necessarily that much, but maybe a bit less. But it is better to have more in the other areas of the compiler. But Bootstrap isn't really that hungry.
Oh, it's good to hear. So basically, if you don't have a very powerful PC and maybe you're kind of newish to Rust and you want to try to contribute, that bootstrapping for rustc could definitely be something people can get into, right?
Yeah, it's something if you're interested in how it works and getting into the guts of the things. Like there's we also use a sort of caching system similar to rustc's which does the incremental compilation. We use a similar system, but only across a single invocation. We don't keep some artifacts between compilation because it causes bugs. Like there are some tests that need to not have the standard library, and there are others that need to have the standard library present. And so we must wipe some directories to make sure things that need to not have the standard lib does not have it.
Yeah, pretty cool.
But also I started with docs. Simply, if someone finds an error or you find an error or a typo in the doc, just do it. It is very simple. You can do it even directly on GitHub. You don't even need to download rustc because it is also a bit disk space hungry. But yeah, you can, if there are docs and you want to break the glass, just fix the doc yourself. I remember I subscribed to all the issues at the start, and for each issue that talked about docs, I jumped on it and I claimed it to do it, to make work for rustc, because I was grateful that it existed.
Oh, that's good. I mean, docs are always most overlooked, but also most people look for docs, right? So people always forget to make docs, but everybody wants docs, right?
Right. In rustc, at least in the standard library, the user-facing docs, there is not much that problem because there are many people that look the PRs, the changes, and most of the time they think about adding docs. But sometimes there is a typo or there is something that is not clear, and it is those cases that the most common.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Well, since I think we got a good rounding of bootstrapping rustc, I don't think there's much else we could say. Is there anything else that you want to say before we sign off?
No, there is not much to say about bootstrapping, but there is so much other things about Rust and rustc that are not directly linked to Bootstrap, but part of the experience of contributing to Rust in the community. Not necessarily the rustc repo, but the community around Rust. That there is so much thing to talk about.
Yeah, definitely. And we can go on for years, not just hours and hours, but years, I think, to talk about all the different things that could be involved with Rust. So, anyways, I'd like to thank you for your time and coming on to talking about this because it is a very important process that people often overlook. And I'm glad that we have people like you who are working on that. And it does sound like you are looking for more people to come help out. Is that right?
We're not seeking new people, but we are always happy to have more people that know this area because knowledge, if you share it, you have more of it.
Well, that's very true. Well, again, thank you for coming on, and we'll hopefully have you back on again in the future.
Yeah, thank you also for having me.